ciudades caben en una ciudad? ¿Cuántas fronteras se atraviesan tienes tú que atravesar? Invisibles como el aire, de cemento o hechas de lenguaje. ¿Cuántas ciudades caben en una ciudad? ¿Cuántas fronteras se atraviesan tienes tú que atravesar? Invisibles como el aire, de cemento o hechas de lenguaje.
Bienvenidos a los Estados Unidos. Welcome to the United States of America. You are about to fly for admission.
Hi, welcome to Latin American Art. Today we'll be exploring a new exhibit at the Museum of Art and Design in New York called La Frontera, looking at artistic interpretations via jewelry of the U.S. Mexico border. With me is Barbara Paris Gifford, Assistant Curator of the Museum, who was instrumental in organizing the show. Barbara, welcome to Latin American Art.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us briefly about the origin and purpose of the show.
Well, the show originated, was originally an idea that came from Lorena Lazard, who is one of the curators of the exhibition. And in 2013, she went to Mike Holmes, who is the other main curator of the exhibition that was focused on the U.S. Mexico border. And in 2013, their first exhibition of the work premiered at the museum, Franz Meyer Museum in Mexico City. It then went to the Velvet Da Vinci Gallery in California, and then I believe to Indiana, and then it wrapped up in Houston in 2014.
Now, as the exhibit has gone to different venues, and now we're 4 years after its first manifestation, representation, how has the museum exhibit been updated to reflect the current times?
MAD is, the Museum of Arts and Design, is very uniquely located for this kind of an exhibition because, of course, our museum stands in front of a Trump building, and there are many protests that take place there, and so we have sort of a unique, soapbox in which to mount an exhibition of this nature. So we decided, we took a very close look at the pieces in the show to make sure that we were representing all the human stories that were necessary for us to really portray in this type of an exhibition. So we called down the pieces to about 62. And I think originally, even though there were 200 applications, I think the original show had 170 or something like this. And then we dedicated a whole wall to sort of outlining the politics and the history of the border to kind of give people a fuller picture of what has gone on at the border, what our relationship is with Mexico, because often it's portrayed as very negative and about drugs and about crime, and in fact there's a much broader and more positive story there that is a lot more mainstream than those situations. And so we wanted to talk about sort of the real statistics behind that relationship, and then we wanted to talk about the prototypes and what Trump has planned. So when you walk into the exhibition, one thing that you'll see, I see that you have it here up on the screen, is we've done a mural of a very, very important protest site, which is between San Diego and Tijuana. And you see this border wall as it currently exists, and you see it running into the Pacific Ocean. And right now, you can see that it's porous. This is a mural that was done by Rebecca Graves, who often works with us. And it's a conglomeration of sort of different pictures. But you can see that there are slats between, and people in Mexico and people in the U.S. can see each other, and it's a common meeting place. And right now, it's a common place for protests. So if you saw a current photo of it, you would see lots of posters up, so it's a very vibrant kind of a place. And the thing that really struck me about this is, as the wall goes into the Pacific Ocean is eating the wall. You know, you see it becoming very, very decrepit, kind of reminding us that nature doesn't really value these kinds of separations and sort of works to weather it and sort of get rid of it.
What jewelry is exhibited that represents the border fence or the future planned or projected or advocated border wall in your piece? Could you tell us about some of them?
Sure. Well, the pieces address many issues. They're divided into 4 main categories. One is the border wall itself, sort of its composition, the fact that it's 1,950 miles long, the fact that it's trying to separate in this very unnatural way. There's also a section that is about perils at the border, which has to do with the plight of crossing the border, which has a whole background to it. And then there are poetic reflections that many artists wanted to sort of express sort of this desire to cross the border for a very, a better lifestyle for their families, and even deeper than that, to cross for safety, to cross to become human, because whatever makes a person put themselves in this kind of danger, they've evaluated in their heads that that's worth it compared to where they are now. And there's this dichotomy and very, very conflicting feelings that happen around that, that anybody who has an immigrant story can relate to, which is that you're leaving your home, you're leaving your family, you don't know what your future might be, but yet you're hopeful and you're looking for better opportunity. So there are a lot of pieces that address that, and then there are a lot of pieces that talk about the plight of the American dream and of the green card specifically.
Could you describe some of the pieces that you consider striking and, let's say, easily accessible to a visitor that doesn't know much about the topic?
Well, the pieces that strike me is there is a piece by the artist Boleen Strand, and she's in her piece. It's a round piece, and it has a line of rubies that is going down the middle, and one side of the circle is black, and one side of it is gold, and it is talking about sort of this dichotomy that we've been talking about, which is, death and separation and all of these sort of perilous feelings that you go through, and then a plight for a better life, for envisioning, a better sense of humanity, and the, rubies that go down the middle represent blood, but they also represent love. And so there's this wholeness that really exists, but then there's also this separation that has a lot of pain involved in it.
Right. I think there's another piece that uses red and dots.
Right.
That's circular.
Yes.
Could you tell us about that?
Yes. So that piece that you're referring to is a mourning brooch by the artist Julia Turner. And that piece, one thing that's very important to point out is that in the 1990s, border walls were built. There's already 900 plus miles of border wall that already exists. And these border walls were put up in major cities. So if you wanted to cross, which was something that was commonplace at that point, you had to be rerouted through the desert. So this journey that once was an easy journey became a very perilous journey. One typified by starvation, by, there's lack of water, so people would die of thirst. It's very hot out in the desert, so their bodies would just break down in the heat, and some would freeze to death in the night, because of course the desert doesn't hold heat. So a lot of the pieces are about that. So getting back to Julia Turner's piece, she plays homage to the sort of 19th century mourning brooch, which is when somebody would pass, you would take a piece of hair and you would put it on a brooch and you'd wear it. And it was a way to honor the person who had passed. In her case, she was very touched by these maps that were put together by a nonprofit organization. And these maps would sort of account for all the deaths that happened in the desert. And they would be marked, the deaths would be marked by map pins. And the closer that you would get to the border, the more concentrated these red pins became. And so when you look at her piece, you see some farther out pins that are representing deaths, and you see, a constellation of pins toward the middle, which show the fact that more bodies were found as you get closer to the border. And when you back up from it, she put these pins in the shape of a desert rose, because all of these deaths are happening really in the desert. And it's a brooch, so it's meant to be worn close to the body, and it's meant to commemorate all the unidentified people that are found in the desert in a pursuit to cross.
Right. I think that difficulty in reaching the border is expressed in two pieces with water jugs stylized. Then, of course, you have the crosses on the border.
Yes.
Then you have another piece which is dominated by worn wood.
Yes.
As a memory to the disappeared along the route, and it's.
Right.
I think you told me it was taken from a cross that was put up as memory.
Right.
One of the perilous ways to get from Central America to the United States is a railroad network called La Bestia. Could you tell us about the pieces in the show that refer to that?
Sure. We talk about La Bestia deeply because a lot of the artists in the show were very struck by it. And La Bestia is, of course, Spanish for the beast. And the beast refers to freight trains. So there are one way to cross the border is when these freight trains, which are mostly, a conglomeration of tracks below Mexico, when they stop to load up, this is not something that is really allowed, but it happens. When these freight trains are stopped, people will get on top of the freight trains and they'll ride them in as far as they can go as a way to kind of traverse this deadly terrain. And it's a very, very dangerous journey. It's a journey that is made by men, women, and children. Often, you have to hold on very tight. This is a long journey. It can take weeks, even months. And doesn't stop with the trains. Often you have to cross water, you have to get into unidentified vehicles, things of that nature, to be able to get all the way across.
Right, if I remember correctly, capturing that difficulty, but the
Yeah.
dream is a necklace in the form of a railroad tracks,
Right.
a little train, and a
Jet
cross with
serpents.
heaven and hell.
Yes.
There's another one which represents the color, but the tracks
Right.
from Central America through Mexico to the States.
Right. There's also there's a group next to those pieces that really is quite touching because it speaks to the empathy that people have for the people crossing on La Bestia. And it's 3 pieces made by Aline Berdichevsky, and there's hand jewels as well as a neck piece. And what you'll see is a rope, a red rope, and then a ceramic, it looks almost like a bag. And it's commemorating a real event that happens in the city of Patrona in I believe in Mexico. And these women get together and they put food and water into these blankets, and they wrap these blankets up with a rope, and then when La Bestia passes by, they throw them at the trains. And often catching one of these bags can be the difference between making it and not making it. But they have a lot of empathy for the people who are crossing and want them to make it, so it's something that they routinely do.
One of the pieces that to me symbolize the different hopes, fears, dreams, reality is this necklace called Sueños, Realidad, dream and reality. Could you tell us more about that?
Sure. That was a piece that was done by Martha Vargas, and the piece depicts in metal the different states of Mexico. And you see butterflies and footsteps, sort of little feet, migrating north across the states. And of course, it's a reference to the monarch butterfly migration north every year. And the artist did a very interesting thing in her statement. She imagined the butterflies as families. So there's a dad butterfly and a mom butterfly and a family, and they're all going together, flying across all the way to Canada. But the reality for humans is very, very different. It's not always the case that the migrant can come with their whole family. You know, often it's a person who's taking a risk, who's coming. There's the realities of the desert, of the terrain, whether or not they'll make it across, and of course there's the reality of the border itself. So the artist is sort of making this comparison between what that experience is like for nature, where there are no borders, and what that experience is like for humans.
The physical barrier, the border, is represented in different ways in the jewelry,
Right.
especially in brooches.
Yes.
No Man's Land.
Yes.
There's one with cartoon figures.
Right.
They all seem to symbolize the difficulty of the terrain or the danger. Could you describe a few of those pieces?
Sure. There's a really, really beautiful brooch done by Judy McCaig called No Man's Land. And you see this sort of black slate that has a glimmer to it. And you can't help but be reminded of the glimmer in sand and sort of maybe the desert terrain at night. And then there's rusted out metal, and then there are cut stones, but they aren't shiny. They're very primitive looking. And all of this refers to sort of the parched sort of earth and desert and sort of the desolate nature of that. And the artist tried to really replicate that and bring that into the exhibition by the very deliberate choices of materials in that piece.
Is that the one, or is it another one, which represents cacti with bottle shards? And I think it's a brooch as well.
Yes, those are done by Chiara Pignotti, and one is depicted in crystal that represents the United States, and one is depicted in bottle glass, green bottle glass, which represents Mexico. And it's a reference to, as you say, the cacti and how, dangerous that is. It's cut glass and it's green, and it reminds you of that sort of desert, those desert characteristics.
There seem to be some pieces that actually try to deconstruct the wall, both in artistic and literal sense. Could you tell us about them?
Yes, I think that you're referring to the pieces by Dimitra Thamlaudis. That's actually quite a beautiful story. Dimitra doesn't live that far from the border wall, and in observing sort of the wall, she noticed that there were materials, paper, wood, pieces of cement, and they, on both sides, would commingle in the wind, So these materials, even though they were residing on two different sides, were sort of coming together. And so she tried to stay true to those materials in developing these brooches and making these brooches, which also echo some of the shapes and things that she observes at the border.
There also seems to be a spiritual aspect with rosaries, since virtually everyone from Central America and Mexico whose goal is to enter the United States is Roman Catholic. But there's some variations of that. So maybe you could explain some of those pieces and their relation to different mentalities.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about what that journey means, when you think about having a situation that is so bad that it would cause you to leave your family, or wanting to not worry about, feeding your family, or about, just living, you embark on this journey and you don't know where it's going to take you. And you don't know if you're going to succeed. You don't know if you're going to see your family again. And so it becomes a very spiritual journey. It becomes something that, you hold God close. And so, as you say, there is a lot of references to rosaries. And one piece by Nicholas Estrada shows sort of this dichotomy where you see, a typical looking rosary, but the beads are disrupted by guns, and then the beads are brought together by, a symbol of the devil, and then at the bottom is, Christ on a cross, and it's referencing, both aspects really of this journey: the dangers, possibly what could happen to you, and the hope that your spirituality and your relationship with God will bring you through. And then there is the artist Kristen Beeler, who, very close to the border in Arizona, there are memorials that are lined up that are remembering sort of the people who have passed, who have been trying to cross the border. And she humanizes those memorials by making rosaries and putting them there to recognize sort of the spirituality of these people, and to make them more known as human beings, not just some unidentified person who's perished.
So in the exhibit, you see her rosaries next to photos of those
Yes.
makeshift memorials.
Yes, and those makeshift memorials They'll often have water jugs, which is a very big symbol of hope. There'll be, you know, stuffed animals or flowers or things that really try to fill out the picture of this person whose life has been lost.
Right. We've talked about the hazards of the migrants, especially going through the desert, where water is very important. I think there's several pieces that have water jugs. Could you tell us about them?
Yes. One piece by Kevin Hughes, which is kind of our icon piece for the exhibition. There's a picture of it on the outside of the museum. It refers to this act, which some people will take water jugs on the U.S. side and the Mexico side. They'll take water jugs and they'll place them in the desert so that, you know, people who are thirsty can drink the water and they'll have a better chance of survival. And if you're caught by Border Patrol, they will make you, they consider you, if you're on the American side, to be un-American, and they'll make you slash the water jugs. And this is a painful act because obviously the people who are doing this care enough to try to save these lives, but they also know in slashing that or having to slash them that's one life that could be lost.
That's the red, white,
That
gray.
is that is an actual handle of one of those water jugs. And the red, you know, the Mexican flag, he's painted it so it reflects the Mexican flag. And it's sort of, you know, an homage to the water bottle, you know, the water jug and how important that is, but also how complicated the very act of putting a water jug out in the desert can be.
Right. Okay, Barbara, thank you very much for giving us an overview
Thank you.
of this exhibit. So that's all for now for Latin American art. See you next time.
Con más vida que un gato, ajá. Si me atan me desato, me matan si no trabajo y si trabajo me mato, mejor busco un atajo. La puerta al cielo está en un supermercado, a mí antes de nacer...
Illegally to the United States.